Hello and welcome to this, the second of 5 video lectures about the human value of tolerance. It is called Gender and explores the question, what about social segregation by gender? The goal of life is life. Individuals and societies aim to reproduce. It's the same whether you look at it from a scientific perspective. We have selfish genes which direct us to work for their future survival, or from a religious perspective, we have been directed to go forth and multiply by God. It's just as important for men as for women. Both want to pass on their genes. And it's just as important for Hindus, Muslims, Christians, atheists, etc. All want their societies to continue. It's the same for all cultures. The rulers of agricultural civilizations were simple creatures. They needed men to create the ruler's wealth. That meant male physical strength to work the fields, go down the mines, or crew the ships. More men meant more wealth generation. And they needed men to protect the ruler's dominion. They needed male aggression and strength for soldiering. More men meant more soldiers to protect what the ruler already had and to expand their dominion. That left women with the burden of producing more men. Agricultural societies need future labour for the fields and future soldiers for protection and expansion, and future mothers to bear future generations of children. Thus, individuals and agricultural societies aim for reproduction, just like all other forms of life on Earth. Nearly all agricultural civilizations everywhere and through the ages came up with the same model to facilitate this reproduction, the nuclear family. This means 2 biological parents, the nucleus of the family atom that everything revolves around, their children, plus strong links to the previous generations, which means any surviving grandparents, and the wider kinship of aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. The near universal nuclear family was the building block of agricultural civilizations. Women stay home, child rearing, domestic work, caring for the aged and sick. Women ran the system of care that supported everything else, albeit hidden away in the home, invisible to wider society. Men go out, provide for their family with whatever's left after the ruler's had his cut, and to protect. And a select few men go out to participate in society's decision making. It was always only ever just a few men. Most men were busy in the fields. But it was largely men that ran agricultural civilizations. History records examples of individual women making significant contributions outside of the home. Cleopatra, Queen of Ancient Egypt, Joan of Arc, a French warrior leader, Queen Victoria as head of the British Empire are well-known examples. But for the most part, women, just like men, were invisible in history, which is mostly the stories of agricultural civilizations. Wikipedia defines patriarchy as a social system in which men hold primary power and predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. Agricultural civilizations were and are patriarchies. Agricultural civilizations are built on biological values, not human values. The need to reproduce plus the ruler's needs means nuclear families and patriarchy. The nuclear family and patriarchy is central to Social Order version 1, agricultural civilizations. In the West, we have transitioned away from that model, and with that transition has come increasing freedom of choice for women. Let's look at 3 things contributing to that increase in women's freedom of choice. First, movement from agricultural villages to industrial cities. There has been a long-term shift from the countryside to industrial cities, and that continues today around the world. Perhaps the most important aspect of this move from village to city is the change in the status of children. Children are no longer assets that can be used as labour in the fields, but mouths to feed and minds to educate. Rural children help in the fields and grow up to be providers for their elderly parents. In the cities, children are more of a burden. Then they leave home and leave their elderly parents to fend for themselves. In family economic terms, children are not assets in industrial societies like they were in agricultural societies. In purely economic terms, they become more of a liability. Fortunately for we proud parents, there are other reasons for having children, the love and joy they bring being central. But now, we don't need quite so many of them. And in the cities, there are domestic labour-saving devices, washing machines, fridges and so on. So there's less work in the home. Cities mean industry and automation, including in the home. And the responsibility for the care of the old and sick shifts to hospitals and care homes. There's less caring to do. Labour specialisation means professionals rather than women at home take on the tasks of caring. The second thing contributing to that increase in women's freedom of choice, the medical advances that reduce child mortality and allow birth control, so women have fewer pregnancies. Industrialization and medical advances have contributed enormously to the increase in freedom of choice we see for women in advanced industrial societies. Consider, which was the 20th century invention with the most impact on society? A, nuclear weapons, B, computers, or C, birth control? Women gaining control of their own fertility is a society-changing development that many would rank as top of any list of the most important developments of the 20th century. Thirdly, society itself has changed, partially or wholly as a result of 1 and 2 above. Society changes, facilitating women's equal role and choices in society. Education for girls as well as boys. Now that's fundamental to women's advancement. In an industrialized society, education is vital. Illiterate peasants aren't that much use in a society that values skills and knowledge. Now, not all patriarchies developed the idea of education for all. Educating girls as well as boys in the West started when our societies were patriarchies. That societal choice long ago, remembering that not all patriarchies choose to educate girls, that choice was crucial for the advancement of women. Women win property, inheritance, and voting rights. There's legal equality with men. The Industrial Revolution had only just got going when some women, educated upper and upper middle class women for the most part, started organizing for property, inheritance rights, and the vote. Those Enlightenment ideas, liberty, progress, tolerance, and science, particularly tolerance with its freedom of choice, are equally applicable to women as men. We could not call these ideas a product of the Enlightenment if these ideas did not apply to everyone. So Western society changes with the emancipation of women. Anti-discrimination laws are passed. Women's equality, equal pay, etc. is normalized. The West doubles down on equality for women by forcing that equality on all of society. And then we find that young women aspire for autonomy first, then, maybe, a family. Pretty much the same as for young men. Not surprising, really, when free to make choices, young women make economic and social choices similar to young men. And cultural norms change. Men do a bigger share of childcare and domestic chores. Men eventually get with the program. And we have divorce, single mothers, same-sex relationships. There are fewer traditional families, though still a traditional family is first choice for many people. Just because the nuclear family is associated with patriarchal agricultural civilizations doesn't in any way invalidate it. Traditional families were what even divorced couples were aiming at to start with. The nuclear family endures. Do not be deceived by a simple list on a slide. The scale of cultural change it describes is enormous. The individual family and societal change involved when moving from an agricultural civilization to an advanced industrial society is wrenching. It happened in the West over the last 200 plus years and is mostly done. Arguably, the biggest effect of that technological and cultural change has been the increase in freedom of choice for women. And the explanation, or justification if you like, for that is simple. While women and men still have different biologies, the needs of advanced industrial societies are different to the needs of agricultural civilizations. Social order version 2, rational cooperation, values minds more than bodies. Men and women are identical in being individually conscious with free will and minds of our own. The human values of liberty and tolerance are not sexist. Men and women have different bodies, but those are not the only gender differences. Two examples to show nurture and nature as applied to gender. Nurture. There are differences in the way our cultures treat girls and boys. Ali et al. Documented that often girls are taught not to talk, I don't know, and boys not to feel, I don't care. Maybe this is not as prevalent as it used to be, but cultural inertia probably means it's still happening in the West. And there are cognitive differences. This is nature at work. Brain scans show differences in male and female brains, according to the video you can watch that's cited down at the left. Reading, writing and speaking in the classroom, on average, brain activity much higher for girls than for boys. It's visuals that tend to work better for boys. Good teachers use good visuals as well as language. With that in mind, you can critique this presentation. Society treats girls differently to boys, but then they are usually different. What is inherited, biology, nature, and what is learned, culture, nurture, is not always clear. The girl's preference for pink and red colour, is that linked to a gender-influenced collective memory in the collective subconscious from gathering berries long ago? Or is it cultural programming? And the boy's preference for blue-green, is that an inherited collective memory in the collective subconscious of hunting on the plains of Africa long ago? Or cultural programming? Research indicates that women tend more towards feeling, men towards thinking. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, the MBTI as it's sometimes called, is a well-known personality type questionnaire. Some of the questions are designed to produce a preference between thinking and feeling. They have a huge database of people who have done the test and there is a difference in feeling thinking preferences, with males being 60% more likely to be thinkers, 40% more likely to be feelers. For females, it's the other way around, 40% feelers, 60% thinkers. Note that this refers to a preference only. Feelers, people who prefer feeling, the approach of feeling, still have to think, and thinkers still feel. And this is in no way, thinking or feeling, related to intelligence. Feelers, what it means is that feelers are more comfortably intuitive. Thinkers are more comfortably analytical. But both feelers and thinkers are using conscious reasoning. As Clemens Lode has noted, a thinker's actions depend on the situation. Given the facts, the thinker asks, what is the next logical step? A feeler's actions depend on the people and morality involved. A feeler will ask, given the people, what is the next logical step? We associate thinking with the brain and feeling with the heart, but in fact both are processes of the mind, as was discussed in the second and third video lectures on the human value of liberty, called Mind and Feel and Think, respectively. And notice something on this slide. The words that have been underlined and italicized here. These are all traits where there is a noticeable tendency one way or the other. But you cannot rely on these traits as a guide when you meet any specific male or female. It's a gamble to bet on stereotypes based on descriptions like often, on average, indicates, tend more towards, preference, more comfortably, etc. Liberals tend to see gender differences as due to nature. Conservatives, those gender differences, they see them as due to nature. But the only difference you can actually stereotype is that no man will ever have a baby. Psychological traits, individual choices and gaps. The first two of these points are from an article in Psychology Today, a magazine called Psychology Today in November 2017, called The Truth About Sex Differences. The first one, dispute resolution. There is a male tendency for physical aggression. We've probably seen it. Posturing first, then threats, verbal threats, and then sometimes, usually not, but sometimes actual physical violence. The thugs who fill prisons are mostly men. In dispute resolution, the female tendency is more for relational aggression. We've probably heard this. Gossips, slurs, ostracism. The word bitch traditionally refers to a woman. It follows then that people react more to reports of female violence than male violence because it's less expected. Maybe that is also true of reputation destruction. It's not news if it comes from a woman, but from a man. Maybe that would explain some of the hyperreaction to President Trump's bitchy comments about his political foes. And the second from the article, women generally are more interested in people. For men, it's usually things. Scandinavia today has a distinct, strong pattern of women in nursing and men in engineering. Men dominate PhDs in engineering, math, computing. It's about things. Women dominate PhD in health sciences and education. It's about people. It's called the Scandinavian paradox. The most gender-equal societies on earth, but women and men are segregating by career choice. You still can't stereotype males and females with this. The male nurse you meet may be a feeler who, at this moment, needs to think. But it also helps explain why there are more male techies than female techies in Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, etc. The pay gap. On average, notice I'm underlining these softer words again on this slide. On average, women earn less than men. But the work by the AEI, which you can see on Christina Hoff Sommers' blog called Factual Feminist, suggests that's mostly due to the different choices women and men make, on average. The pay gap gets more mentions than the leadership gap that we look at next, but much of the pay gap can be explained by the different choices that men and women make. Women, though, are less represented in senior management positions and politics. Why this leadership gap? Are women less suited to senior management position and politics? No. Management role descriptions always require system knowledge, where males might have an advantage, and people skills, where females might have an advantage. And there's been Margaret Thatcher, Angela Merkel, Hillary Clinton, and countless others. Over the past half century or more, there have been far too many capable women leaders to sustain any notion of inherent difference in leadership capability. This was a patriarchal trope that has died away with the experience of reality today. But are women generally less willing to choose 80-hour weeks for 30 years to become a law firm senior partner? Maybe. As Jordan Peterson has commentated, to reach senior leadership positions usually requires the kind of commitment, dedication, and sacrifice, but that most of us, men and women, are just not prepared to make. And Peterson speculates that women are, on average, more likely than men to find better things to spend their lives on than being in the office and living in hotel rooms. And if a heterosexual family can afford to choose that one partner stays home to focus on bringing up the children, it's usually the mother. Male-female differences are not always due to culture and are not some kind of social construction. Male and female differences are real and not always due to nurture. Something relevant to gender and tolerance is the fact that we each have something of the opposite gender within us, as Jordan Peterson explains in the video referenced on the slide. The female in the male is called anima, and the male in the female is called animus. And in a gendered society, for each gender, it's difficult to develop and exercise those aspects of the personality that correspond with the opposed gender. Men could better develop the capacity for compassion that comes more naturally to women. And women could better develop the capacity for aggression that comes more naturally to men. But in a gendered society, which we have either by nature or nurture, depending on your politics, that development of our inner opposed genders doesn't happen often enough. Even less does it happen early on in development. Peterson cites Jung, who was a psychological guru of the 20th century, early 20th century, as saying that you should develop your own gender personality aspect first, but not to stop there. So how does an undeveloped anima manifest itself? Peterson says, as a man showing second-rate and futile emotions. So a man trying to use his undeveloped inner female can come across as a bit pathetic. And how does an undeveloped animus manifest itself? As a woman who seems to be arguing, says Peterson, just for the sake of argument. So a woman trying to use her undeveloped inner male can come across as argumentative. We've probably all had experience of pathetic men and argumentative women. We can probably all remember times when the appropriate gender description applied to ourselves. I certainly can. Peterson's video was a revelation, which unfortunately came decades too late for me. Applying that psychological insight to gender and leadership, sometimes leaders need to persuade and sometimes they need to assert themselves. A woman might well be effective in persuasion by using the female trait for compassion. But a man using their undeveloped anima might be less effective, coming across as pathetic. A man might well be effective in assertiveness by using the male trait for aggression. But a woman using their undeveloped animus might be less effective, coming across as argumentative. Assertive more than persuasive is the preferred leadership trait in today's West. Machiavelli notwithstanding, followers usually prefer leaders to be likable, and likability is an issue for high-flying, high-potential women with a less developed animus. No one likes someone who is pathetic or argumentative, and throughout my career I've been sent on soft skills courses to try and develop, if only a little, my people skills, so that I might come across as a little less pathetic when I try to do anything that involves compassion. But it seems to be more of an issue for high potential and high flying women than for their male counterparts. Probably because in most Western management cultures, assertiveness is seen as a key leadership quality, persuasion less so. From my experience, leaders are taught in management courses that the best way to persuade people that things need to change is to 1. Assert that there is an issue, framing that issue so as to engender maximum credibility for your assertion. Then 2. Assert a vision for the future, describing that vision so as to make your assertion of the future desired state as appealing as possible. And then 3. Assert the path from present to future. You see, assertiveness is a key leadership trait, at least in today's hierarchies in the West. Jordan Peterson talks about some of his clinical psychology clients, female high flyers who come to him for help with assertiveness. And you sometimes hear about the unfairness of female politicians in the US having to contend with a perceived lack of likability. It certainly does seem unfair that men can get away with an undeveloped anima, as I have witnessed in myself and many other male leaders over my career, but women don't seem to be able to get away as easily with an undeveloped animus. Maybe that will change, but in any case, the advice for all high potential or high flying people is to look at developing their opposed gender. That is especially good advice for female high flyers and potential leaders today. Before wrapping up, I'll leave you with 2 quotes that give some insight into the way forward. The first is learned, the second more light-hearted. Both, I think, have meaning. The first one comes from Sarah B. Hardy, who is a professor of anthropology and author of the book Mother Nature. She says, underlying tensions and anxieties over gender roles are exceedingly old and have surfaced again and again at different times across many cultures. That is the professor telling us that establishing a societal male-female equilibrium is nothing new. It's happened many times before. And the more light-hearted quote comes from Henry Kissinger. He said, "No one will ever win the battle of the sexes. There's too much fraternizing with the enemy." And long may it be so. The general point from the perspective of society as a whole is this. Society-enforced gender segregation is mostly gone from the West thanks to equity feminism. Equity feminism meaning equality of women and men in freedom of conscience, enterprise and choice, the very definition of tolerance. So we are left to experience, value and handle the diversity gender brings. Thank you for watching. The next in the series Understanding Ourselves Through Our Human Values is the third of 5 video lectures about the human value of tolerance. It is called Ethnicity Race and explores the question, when enforced ethnic racial segregation ends, then what? It can be found at www.conservatus.com, where there's reasoning that resonates. Conservatus. Keep safe, intact, save from danger our human values.